I wore the same 3 outfits to school for 2 years because my mother said we couldn't afford new clothes. The truth is, my family could have bought the entire mall without blinking. I just didn't know it yet, and by the time I found out, I wasn't even angry. In fact, I realized they'd given me something far more valuable than money. But before I explain that, you need to understand what it was like. Growing up thinking you're one mistake away from losing everything. My name is Caroline, and this is the story of how poverty shaped me. Even though I was never actually poor at all. When I was 7 years old, I asked my mother why we never went on vacation. All my classmates came back from summer break with stories about beaches and theme parks. I came back with stories about helping my dad organize the garage for the 3rd time. My mother looked at me with this expression I'd come to know well. Part sadness, part something I couldn't quite identify. She said, "Caroline, we have to be careful with our money. Not everyone is as fortunate as your friends' families." I accepted that answer because what choice did a 7-year-old have? I learned to stop asking for things that seemed beyond our reach. And honestly, I became proud of my restraint. While other kids threw tantrums in stores, I walked past toy aisles without a word. I thought I was being mature, responsible even. What I didn't know was that I was being trained. Our house was nice enough, a 3-bedroom in a decent neighborhood. But it wasn't anything special compared to my friends' homes. Sarah lived in a house with a pool and a game room. Marcus had a basement that was basically an arcade. I had a bedroom I shared with my younger sister Emma until I was 12. We complained about it constantly, the way sisters do. But my parents would just remind us how lucky we were to have a roof. How some children didn't even have beds. They weren't wrong, and that made it hard to argue. My father worked in what he called business consulting. I never really understood what that meant, and he never elaborated. He left early in the morning wearing simple suits. Nothing flashy, always the same rotating selection of 5. He came home late, looking tired but content. My mother was a part-time bookkeeper for local businesses. She worked from home mostly, always at our dining room table. Surrounded by folders and receipts, her reading glasses perched on her nose. They seemed like regular, hard-working, middle-class parents. The kind who checked price tags and used coupons. The kind who said things like money doesn't grow on trees. And I believed every single word of it. When I turned 13, I wanted to take violin lessons. I'd heard someone play at a school assembly and fallen in love. The way the music seemed to reach inside your chest and rearrange something there. I researched the cost of lessons. Then I researched the cost of renting a violin versus buying one. I created a whole presentation for my parents, showing them how I could contribute. I'd babysit the neighbors' kids, I'd do extra chores. I'd make it work without putting strain on the family budget. My father listened to my entire pitch with his hands folded on the table. When I finished, he exchanged a look with my mother. That same look I'd seen 1,000 times but never quite understood. He said, "Caroline, I'm proud of how thoroughly you've thought this through. That kind of planning will serve you well in life. But right now, violin lessons aren't in our budget. However, the public library has instructional books and videos. If you're serious about learning, you can start there, completely free." I was disappointed, but I took his suggestion seriously. I checked out every violin book the library had. I watched grainy instructional videos on their ancient computer terminals. I learned music theory without ever touching an actual instrument. And you know what? It taught me something valuable about delayed gratification. About working within constraints, about creative problem solving. Eventually, I saved enough from babysitting. And when I finally held my rented violin, I treasured it differently. than I would have if it had simply been handed to me. High school brought a new level of awareness about money. Or more accurately, the appearance of not having enough of it. My friends started getting cars for their 16th birthdays. Nothing extravagant usually, just reliable used vehicles. But they were symbols of freedom, of growing up. When my 16th birthday came, there was no car. My parents took me to dinner at a nice restaurant. Well, nice by our standards, a chain steakhouse. And they gave me a card with $200 cash inside. My father said, "This is for your savings account. When you're ready to buy a car, we'll match whatever you've saved up to $2,000. But you need to earn it first, show us you're responsible." I wasn't upset, I'd expected something like this. What did surprise me was how some of my friends reacted. Sarah, whose family had the pool, seemed almost offended on my behalf. She couldn't understand why my parents wouldn't just buy me a car. Even a cheap one, she said, as if that made it better. I found myself defending my parents' decision, and meaning it. They're teaching me the value of working for what I want. Sarah just shrugged, like I was making excuses. But here's something I noticed that stuck with me for years. Sarah, who had everything handed to her, complained constantly. Her car wasn't new enough, her allowance wasn't big enough. Her parents weren't giving her enough freedom or enough support. Meanwhile, I was genuinely grateful for the opportunity to earn my way. I got a job at a local coffee shop that summer. Minimum wage, early morning shifts that started at 5 a.m. I learned to make complicated drinks, to handle rush hour chaos, to smile at customers even when they were rude about their orders. Every paycheck went into my savings account, minus a small amount for the occasional movie or coffee with friends. By the time I turned 17, I had $3,500 saved. My parents matched $2,000 as promised, and I bought my first car, a 7-year-old Honda Civic with 100,000 miles. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever owned. But there were moments, small ones, that didn't quite add up. If you've ever felt like the people closest to you were keeping secrets, you'll understand this part. My junior year, I needed to write an essay about family heritage. I asked my father about his parents, my grandparents, who had passed away before I was born, or so I'd been told. He got this distant look and said they'd been simple people. Farmers who worked hard and didn't leave much behind. But when I pressed for details, specific stories or memories, he changed the subject abruptly. My mother's parents were apparently similar, hardworking but unremarkable. She had photos of them, faded pictures in old frames. But she never told stories about growing up, about holidays or traditions. It was like their entire history had been quietly erased. I wrote my essay about resilience and the working-class American dream. My teacher gave me an A and said it was deeply moving. If only she knew how much of it was creative speculation. Another odd thing happened when I was applying to colleges. I assumed I'd need to apply for every scholarship and grant available. My guidance counselor had scheduled meetings to help students navigate the financial aid process, and I was first in line. But when I told my parents I needed their tax returns for the FAFSA, my father hesitated in a way that seemed strange. He said, "Let's wait and see where you get accepted first. Then we'll figure out the financial side." I argued that the deadlines didn't work that way, that I needed to apply for aid at the same time as admission. My mother intervened with that look again, the one I still couldn't read. She said, "Caroline, your father and I have some money set aside. We've been saving for your education since you were born. It's not a lot, but it should cover a state school. We'll make the rest work somehow, don't worry." I was surprised and grateful, but also confused. If they had college savings, why had we lived so frugally my entire life? Why the constant reminders about being careful with money? I didn't push it though, I was too relieved about not drowning in debt. I got accepted to a good state university with a partial scholarship. Between that and my parents' contribution, I'd graduate debt-free. Another thing my friends couldn't quite believe. College was the first time I lived away from home for an extended period. And it opened my eyes to how different people's relationships with money could be. My roommate freshman year, Ashley, came from serious wealth. Her parents owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 states. She had a credit card with no limit for emergencies, which apparently included late-night pizza and impromptu shopping trips. But Ashley was miserable in ways I was only beginning to understand. Her parents had expectations, pressure that came with their financial support. She had to major in business, had to maintain a specific GPA, had to attend certain networking events and join the right organizations. She wanted to study art history and work in museums. But that wasn't practical according to her father. I, on the other hand, had complete freedom to choose my path. My parents never once told me what to study or what career to pursue. They just said, find something you're passionate about, something that makes you want to get up in the morning. I chose economics, fascinated by how markets and human behavior intersected. Not because anyone pushed me, but because it genuinely excited me. I didn't imagine how many people would recognize themselves in that moment. The realization that financial struggle had given me something that money couldn't buy, authentic autonomy. During my sophomore year, something happened that should have been a clue. I was home for Thanksgiving break when my father got a phone call. He stepped out onto the back porch to take it, which wasn't unusual. But I happened to walk past the window and heard fragments. He was talking about the Singapore acquisition and quarterly projections. And something about the board meeting next week. When he came back inside, I asked casually what the call was about. He said, just work stuff, nothing important. But business consultants don't usually deal with acquisitions or report to boards, at least not that I knew of. I let it go, assuming I'd misheard or misunderstood. Besides, I was too focused on my own life to investigate my father's work. I had exams to study for and a social life to maintain. My parents' mysterious behavior was just background noise. Junior year, I started dating someone who came from a very different background. Marcus, no relation to my childhood friend, was from old money. The kind where people don't talk about wealth because it's simply assumed. His family had a summer house that was actually a compound in Maine, and a city apartment that was a penthouse overlooking Central Park. He was kind and smart, and he genuinely didn't care about money, which is easy to do when you've never worried about it. When I brought him home to meet my parents during spring break, I was nervous about the obvious disparity. Our modest 3-bedroom house versus his family's multiple properties. But Marcus was gracious, complimenting my mother's cooking and asking my father thoughtful questions about his consulting work. What was strange was how my father responded to those questions. He gave vague, generic answers that revealed almost nothing. Marcus noticed, I could tell by the slight furrow in his brow. Later that night, after Marcus had left, my mother pulled me aside. She said, "He's a nice young man, Caroline. But be careful not to let his world change how you see yours. You've been raised with values that money can't buy." I assured her I knew that, and I meant it. But her comment stuck with me. It seemed oddly specific. Almost like she was warning me about something I couldn't see yet. Marcus and I dated for about a year before things naturally fizzled out. Not because of money, but because we wanted different futures. He was headed to law school and eventually into politics. I wanted to work in international development, maybe with nonprofits. We parted as friends, and I threw myself into my senior year. I graduated with honors, landed a job at a small consulting firm, and found a tiny studio apartment in the city. It was barely bigger than my childhood bedroom, but it was mine. I furnished it with second-hand finds and IKEA basics, and felt an enormous sense of accomplishment every time I walked in. My parents came to visit once I was settled, bringing a housewarming gift, a set of nice cookware that I knew had to have cost more than they usually spend on such things. My father looked around my small space with something like pride. He said, "You've built this life yourself, Caroline. That's something no one can ever take from you." At the time, I thought it was just a dad being sentimental. Now I understand it was something much more deliberate. I was 23 when everything I thought I knew shattered and reformed into a completely different picture. It started with a letter that arrived at my apartment on a Tuesday afternoon. Thick cream-colored envelope, expensive paper with embossed letterhead. From a law firm I'd never heard of. I almost threw it away, assuming it was some kind of scam. But curiosity won out, and I opened it while eating leftover takeout. The letter requested my presence at their downtown office for a matter concerning the estate of William and Margaret Whitmore, my paternal grandparents, supposedly dead since before I was born. My first thought was that someone was trying to pull an inheritance scam. My second thought was to call my father and ask what this was about. But something made me hesitate, a gut feeling that maybe I should see what this was before involving my parents. I scheduled the appointment for the following Friday afternoon, taking a long lunch from work and telling no one where I was going. The law office was in one of those buildings I'd walked past 100 times. All glass and steel, the kind where doormen wear white gloves. I felt underdressed in my work clothes, a simple blazer and slacks, as I rode the elevator to the 32nd floor. The receptionist was expecting me, which somehow made it more real. She led me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a view that probably cost more than my annual rent just to maintain. A man in his 60s entered, perfectly tailored suit, silver hair, the bearing of someone who'd spent decades handling other people's fortunes. He introduced himself as Robert Whitmore, senior partner, and apparently a distant relative I'd never heard of. "Miss Whitmore," he began, and that's when I realized I'd never actually known my father's last name wasn't Johnson. That had been my mother's maiden name, which he'd taken. I apologize for the mystery surrounding this meeting, but there are certain matters that needed to be addressed in person. He slid a folder across the polished mahogany table toward me. Inside were documents, financial statements, property deeds, photographs of buildings and businesses I didn't recognize, and a family tree that showed connections I'd never known existed. My grandfather, William Whitmore, hadn't been a simple farmer. He'd been the founder of Whitmore Industrial Solutions, a manufacturing and logistics company that operated across 6 continents. The company he'd built from nothing in the 1950s had grown into a multi-billion-dollar empire. My grandmother, Margaret, had inherited a significant textile business from her own family, which had been absorbed into the larger company. Together they'd created one of the most successful private corporations in the country. I sat there, staring at numbers that didn't seem real. Asset valuations in the billions, with AB properties spanning from Manhattan penthouses to factories in Southeast Asia to vineyards in France. And my father's name was listed as the primary heir and current chairman of the board, a position he'd held for 25 years. Your father, Robert continued, chose to live differently. After inheriting the company, he maintained a very low profile. His grandfather's wish was that the next generation appreciate the value of work and not be corrupted by wealth. Your father took that directive very seriously. I looked up from the documents, my hands actually trembling. He lied to me my entire life. The words came out flat, emotionless. Robert's expression was carefully neutral, professional. He raised you according to a specific philosophy. Whether that constitutes deception is perhaps a matter of perspective. The reason I've contacted you now is that you've reached the age specified in your grandparents' trust. 23, the age they believed someone has enough life experience to handle significant wealth responsibly. He pulled out another document, this one with my name at the top in elegant script. You are entitled to a significant trust fund. Additionally, you have the option to take an active role in the family business, should you choose to do so. Your father has asked that I present you with these options and allow you to make your own decisions going forward. I couldn't process it, any of it. 23 years of carefully constructed reality had just collapsed. Every memory was recontextualizing itself in real time. The modest house, the budget vacations, the used car I'd worked so hard to earn, all of it had been theater. An elaborate performance designed to shape who I became. I need to think, I managed to say. Of course, Robert said smoothly. Take all the time you need, there's no rush on any decisions. Your father has made it clear that this is entirely your choice. The trust funds are yours regardless of what you decide about involvement with the company. He gave me his card, explained I could call anytime, and that he'd be happy to answer any questions I might have. I walked out of that building in a daze, literally bumping into a stranger on the sidewalk and barely noticing. I called in sick for the rest of the day, went back to my tiny apartment, and sat on the floor surrounded by the documents Robert had given me. For hours, I'd just read, trying to understand the scope of what had been hidden from me. The trust fund alone was worth more than I could spend in several lifetimes if I tried. My inheritance from the larger estate would be even more substantial. Once my parents passed, though that felt too morbid to contemplate, I could quit my job tomorrow and never work again. I could buy a penthouse, travel the world first class. I could become exactly the kind of person I'd always pitied. Someone whose wealth insulated them from real life. The thought made me physically ill. I didn't call my parents that night or the next day. I needed time to sort through my feelings before I could face them. What I was feeling wasn't exactly anger, though there was some of that. It was more like profound disorientation. Like I'd been living in a carefully constructed simulation, and someone had just pulled back the curtain to reveal the machinery behind it all. But here's what surprised me most about my own reaction. As I sat there going through all these revelations, I started to understand what my parents had actually given me. I thought about Ashley, my college roommate who'd been miserable despite her unlimited credit card, about Marcus, whose family wealth had come with so many strings attached that he could barely move, about Sarah from high school, who'd had everything and appreciated nothing. I thought about the person I'd become, someone who valued hard work, who found genuine satisfaction in earning things, who had chosen my career based on passion rather than profit, who knew how to live on a budget and find joy in simple things. Would I have developed any of those qualities if I'd known about the family fortune from the beginning? Probably not, if I'm being honest with myself. I would have been different, maybe not worse necessarily, but fundamentally different in ways I couldn't predict. On the third day, I finally called my father. He answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting. "Caroline," he said, and there was so much in that one word. Relief, apprehension, maybe even a little fear. "I met with Robert Whitmore," I said. There was a long pause, then a heavy exhale. "I'd like to explain," he said quietly. "If you're willing to listen." We agreed to meet the following weekend at their house. The house I now knew they could have replaced with a mansion. If they'd wanted to, 100 times over. That Saturday, I drove the 2 hours back to my childhood home. In my used Honda, the car that had seemed like such an achievement. When I'd bought it, every familiar street looked different now. Knowing that my family could have lived anywhere they chose, but had deliberately chosen this middle-class neighborhood. This ordinary life. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She'd been watching for me. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying, which was unusual. I'd rarely seen my mother show that kind of vulnerability. "Caroline," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Please know that everything we did out of love." I hugged her, surprising both of us, I think. "I know, Mom, I'm not angry." And as I said it, I realized it was true. I wasn't angry, I was just trying to understand. We sat in the living room, the same room where I'd spent countless evenings doing homework on the worn couch. My father sat in his usual chair, hands folded. Looking older somehow, or maybe I was just seeing him differently now. "I want to tell you about your grandfather," he began. William Whitmore was a brilliant man, a self-made success, who built an empire from absolutely nothing. But he watched wealth destroy people he cared about. His own siblings became parasites, living off his success, without ever contributing anything meaningful. His business partners' children grew up entitled and useless. By the time I came along, he had very specific ideas about how the next generation should be raised. My father explained how his own childhood had been split into 2 distinct phases, until he was 16. He'd lived modestly, attending public school, working summer jobs, learning to budget and save, on his 16th birthday. His father had sat him down and revealed the full scope of the family wealth. "It was a shock," my father said, "not unlike what you're experiencing." But my father explained that he'd wanted me to develop a strong character before money could corrupt it. He made me work in the business from the ground up, starting in the factories, then moving through every department. I didn't take over as chairman until I'd earned it. Not through inheritance, but through actual knowledge and experience. My mother added, "When your father and I got married, we had long discussions about how we wanted to raise children, how it could rob them of purpose and genuine relationships. We decided to follow your grandfather's philosophy, but take it even further. We wanted you and Emma to develop completely independently. We'd both seen how wealth could without damage the shadow people of family wealth influencing your choices." I listened as they explained the elaborate system they'd created. My father had indeed been running the company all these years, but he did it under a carefully maintained disguise. The consulting work was real, he just happened to be consulting for a company he owned, the modest lifestyle, the budget constraints, the used cars and home-cooked meals. All of it had been intentional. They'd created an entirely separate financial identity to maintain the illusion. We lived on a self-imposed budget, my mother explained, about what a middle manager and a part-time bookkeeper would actually earn. Everything else, all the profits from the company, went into trusts and investments for you and your sister. We wanted you to choose your own path, my father continued, without the weight of expectation or the corruption of knowing you'd never have to work for anything. We wanted you to know who you were as a person, before money could define you. I thought about all the times I'd felt embarrassed by our modest circumstances, that my friends had taken for granted, but I also thought about who I'd become because of those experiences. I chose economics, I said slowly, because I was genuinely interested in it, not because anyone pushed me. I took that job at the consulting firm because I wanted to learn, not because I needed the money. I'm proud of my apartment, my car, my independence, because I earned all of it myself. My father nodded, his eyes bright with something that might have been tears. That's exactly what we hoped for, Caroline. We wanted you to have authentic accomplishments, real confidence that came from your own abilities, not from a safety net you didn't even know was there. We talked for hours that day. They answered every question I had about the business, about the extent of the wealth, about their plans for the future. My sister Emma, who was still in college, would receive the same revelation. When she turned 23, they decided not to tell us at the same time because our reactions and decisions should be independent of each other. My father explained that I had complete freedom now. I could access the trust fund, live however I wanted, get involved with the family business or ignore it entirely. The only thing he asked was that I think carefully about my choices, that I not make major decisions. In the immediate emotional aftermath of this revelation, take your time, he said, the money isn't going anywhere. The business will continue running whether you're involved or not. There's no pressure, no timeline. We just want you to be happy and fulfilled. I drove back to the city that evening in a strange state of mind, not angry, not even really confused anymore. More like quietly contemplative. I understood what my parents had done and, more importantly, why. They'd given me something that money genuinely couldn't buy. The experience of building a life from the ground up. The knowledge that I could survive and thrive on my own. The confidence that came from real achievement. Rather than inherited privilege, I thought about all the people I'd met who'd been born into wealth. Very few of them seemed genuinely happy, most carried a strange emptiness, a lack of purpose that came from never having to struggle for anything. They didn't know who they really were because they'd never had to test themselves against real challenges. Their accomplishments always came with an asterisk, a quiet question about whether they'd actually earned their success or just bought it. I didn't have that burden. I knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of because I'd proven it to myself without any safety net visible. Over the next few months, I made some decisions. I didn't quit my job. I genuinely enjoyed the work, and I wanted to see how far I could go based purely on my own merit. I didn't move out of my tiny apartment or buy a new car. Those things represented achievements that meant something to me, but I did start making some changes. I began donating to causes I cared about, anonymously, using the trust fund. I paid off my friends' student loans as surprise gifts, setting up the payments to look like they'd won some kind of lottery. I started a scholarship program at my old high school for students from low-income families, wanting to give others the opportunities I'd thought I'd lacked. I also began learning about the family business, not because I felt obligated, but because I was genuinely curious. My father arranged for me to visit different facilities, meet with managers, understand how the company operated. What surprised me was how innovative and ethical the operation was. This wasn't some exploitative Corporation, it was a company that actually cared about its workers, invested in sustainable practices, and contributed meaningfully to the communities where it operated. My grandfather had built something worth being proud of, and my father had maintained and expanded that legacy responsibly. About 6 months after the revelation, something happened that really put everything in perspective for me. I was at a networking event for young professionals, something my company had encouraged me to attend. I ended up in conversation with a woman about my age, named Jennifer, who came from serious old money. She was complaining about how her family expected her to take over their investment firm, even though she had no interest in finance. "They've been grooming me for this since I was 10. She said bitterly. Private tutors, internships at the firm during summer breaks, business school. I never got to figure out what I actually wanted. It was all decided before I could even have an opinion." I asked her what she would have chosen if she'd been free. Her whole face changed, lighting up in a way that made her look years younger. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said softly. "Elementary school, I love working with kids." But my father laughed when I mentioned it, said it would be a waste of my education and our family name. In that moment, I understood the full gift my parents had given me. They'd let me be whoever I wanted to be, no expectations, no predetermined path, no family legacy weighing on every decision. I'd chosen economics because it fascinated me. I'd taken my current job because I wanted the experience. Every choice I'd made had been genuinely mine, and that freedom was worth more than any amount of money. I told Jennifer, without revealing my own situation, that it wasn't too late to change course, that she could still pursue teaching if she really wanted to. She just shook her head sadly. "The money makes it impossible," she explained. "If I walk away from the firm, I lose my trust fund, my inheritance, everything, and I don't know how to live without it. I never learned. I'm trapped by wealth I didn't even earn." That's when I realized my parents hadn't just given me character and work ethic, they'd given me freedom. Real freedom, the kind that comes from knowing you can survive and thrive on your own. I wasn't trapped by the family wealth because I'd already proven I didn't need it. I could walk away from it entirely if I wanted to, and be perfectly fine, or I could engage with it on my own terms, without feeling obligated or controlled. Eventually, I did decide to get more involved with the family business, but I did it my way. I took a position in the sustainability division, working to make our operations more environmentally responsible. It combined my economics background with work that felt meaningful and aligned with my values. I didn't tell my colleagues about my family connection. I wanted to prove myself based on the quality of my work, not my last name. And you know what? I was good at it, really good. Within a year, I'd implemented changes that saved the company millions while reducing our carbon footprint by 30%. I earned respect from people who had no idea I was the chairman's daughter, and that respect meant everything to me. My sister Emma had her revelation when she turned 23, about 2 years after mine. Her reaction was different from mine, more angry initially. She felt betrayed by the deception in a way I hadn't, but she came around eventually, especially after she saw how the experience had shaped both of us. She'd become a nurse driven by a genuine desire to help people. She chose to keep working even after learning about the trust fund because she loved her job and found meaning in it. She used some of the money to start a free clinic in an underserved neighborhood, combining her passion with resources to make a real difference. Not
Now,
by financial necessity or family pressure. I can honestly say I'm grateful for the way I was raised. Yes, my parents lied to me, or at least withheld a massive truth, but they did it with intention and with my best interests at heart. They gave me the chance to become someone who earns rather than inherits, who chooses rather than accepts, who knows the value of a dollar because I've worked for everyone. I've met so many people who were damaged by wealth, not strengthened by it. People who never developed resilience because they never faced real challenges, people who never discovered their own capabilities because everything was always handled for them. People who never knew if they were valued for themselves or for their money. I don't have those doubts. I know exactly who I am and what I'm capable of. I know my relationships are genuine because they were formed when people thought I was ordinary. I know my accomplishments are real because I achieved them without any visible advantages. The poverty was fake, but the character it built was absolutely real, and that character has become the foundation of everything good in my life. I still live relatively modestly, not out of necessity now, but out of choice. I upgraded to a nicer apartment eventually, but nothing extravagant. I bought a better car, but kept the old Honda for sentimental reasons. I travel more now, experiencing the world in ways I never could before, but I still value budget airlines and hostels sometimes because they connect you with people and experiences you'd miss in luxury hotels. The wealth hasn't changed who I am fundamentally, because by the time I learned about it, I was already fully formed. My values were set, my character was established, my sense of self was unshakable. The money just became a tool, a way to amplify the good I wanted to do in the world, rather than defining who I was. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd known from the beginning. Would I have worked as hard in school knowing I'd never need the grades? Would I have developed the same work ethic, the same appreciation for what I have? Would I have chosen economics because I loved it, or would I have drifted towards something easier, less challenging? Would I have the same friends, the same relationships built on genuine connection, rather than what I could offer them? The answer is probably not, and that's exactly why my parents did what they did. They understood that struggle builds character in ways that comfort never can. That the best gift they could give me wasn't money, but the ability to thrive. Without it, they gave me something that money couldn't buy: the knowledge that I could handle whatever life threw at me, because I'd already proven it to myself when I thought I had nothing to fall back on. So no, I'm not angry about the deception. I'm grateful for it, grateful for every budgeted vacation, every second-hand purchase, every moment I thought we were struggling, but were actually being deliberately shaped into stronger, more complete human beings. My parents gave me the greatest inheritance possible, not money, but the character to use money wisely. They gave me authenticity in a world where wealth so often breeds fakeness. They gave me freedom in a situation where money usually creates obligation. And they gave me the ability to choose my own path, knowing that whatever I chose would be genuinely mine. That's a gift worth more than all the billions in the world. Have you ever had to walk away from people who should love you, or discovered that the struggle you thought to find you was actually preparing you for something greater than you could have imagined?